Hello, my name is Simon Gray and welcome to BVI Business Insight. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second edition of our new meeting key firms and key individuals representing BVI Finance member firms. Today I'm delighted to have with us Patrick Ormond and also Lodewijk van Setten, both from the firm of Walkers. I should point out that during the evening BVI Finance actually hosted a webinar in Dubai where we had Tom Cochrane from the DIFC also speaking from Walkers, along with a number of other key legal firms. So certainly good exposure for Walkers. By way of a brief introduction, these gentlemen have formidable CVs. It is a little humbling when I read them, but by way of summary, Patrick is the managing partner of the BVI office and heads the firm's finance, corporate and funds group within the territory. And he's got significant experience in financial institutions, corporate fund creation, and also advising investors on international finance and corporate transactions, mergers and acquisitions, JVs, IPOs, and corporate reorganizations. According to Chambers and Partners of 500, he's very efficient, he gets things done quickly and correctly. And like me, shares a fondness for history. Lodewijk van Setten is a senior counsel in the Global Regulatory and Risk Advisory Group of Walkers. He's a prolific writer on law and financial services. He's also a visiting professor at King's College London, and his expertise ranges across the full spectrum of regulation in terms of every facet of financial services, and he has a particular interest in alternative investments. So welcome to both of you today. In terms of a very brief introduction, may we live in interesting times is an old Chinese saying which has been adopted by the English who pretend it is their own. And whilst apparently a blessing, the expression is normally used with a degree of British irony. Life sometimes is better in uninteresting times of peace and tranquility than in interesting times, which are usually times of trouble. But as we know, often out of a crisis can arise an opportunity, and although 2020 is turning into a very different year from most of what we thought would happen in January, COVID-19 certainly is creating a new normal. And this is therefore relevant to discuss BVI business generally, financial services and the legal practices, and I'm delighted to have you both with us. Patrick, if I could start by asking you to talk a little about the structures you typically see being used within the BVI.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's really the whole gamut of corporate structures which the BVI is used for. It's a truly global product, and we work with international project finance transactions for infrastructure in developing countries, joint ventures, funds, and other capital raising structures like IPOs and SPACs. So it really covers a very broad range of transactions, and is very flexible, always cost efficient, and efficient generally. The speed of incorporation, the registry, the systems are all set up to make doing business easy in the BVI.
May I press you on that? Obviously, you discussed the common law system, which is a highly flexible approach. In terms of the regulatory approach being taken, you mentioned speed and cost. Are you finding that very competitive globally?
Yeah, I mean, regulation is something which has been developing quite fast globally, affecting every jurisdiction, and it's certainly an area we've felt the need to invest. So we've recently hired Lodewijk. We have other regulatory people around the world to provide that advice. Things have changed. Recently we've seen economic substance, FATCA and CRS before that. there's no regulation doesn't stop, but each time something has been introduced, the BVI has adapted, and so far, we've seen registered agents, law firms all being quite efficient, and the regulator being quite sensible about providing guidance which makes business work while satisfying those requirements of people like the EU, the OECD, and that's been borne out in recent developments such as being whitelisted.
Yeah, and if I could chip in there, I've observed that I'm quite impressed actually with the flexibility of the system and the pragmatism of the regulators here and the ease of access. So just simply reading the rules often gets you 80% of the way, and if you then need further clarification or anything like that, it is fairly easy to get to the regulatory heart of the matter and also get a helpful response, which I'm very impressed with, to be honest.
Now, well, long may it continue. There's a saying that the words regulator and regulated are first cousins, and let us hope first cousins don't ever fall out, because that would be very bad for business. But
indeed,
having worked for both regulator and regulated, I absolutely support and endorse that approach, and consultation is key, because the risk of divergence and misunderstanding is diminished, and so it makes the process of change to be expedited much more easily.
yeah.
I wonder if I could perhaps ask you to talk about the SPAC system, Special Purpose Acquisition Company. You referred to it in your earlier response.
Yeah, sure. So a SPAC is really where you raise a shell vehicle on an international public market. So it might be New York Stock Exchange, might be London Stock Exchange. And you have some people who know that they want to invest, sometimes in an area, particular area, sometimes without much focus, but they want to raise the money and then be able to invest quickly once they've identified a target. And this is it's been popular in places like China, and for Chinese entities or Asian structures raising money who want to access, say, New York markets, then you would often use a foreign company to be a foreign issuer. So BVI, there are other jurisdictions as well, and we've seen a number of these. I mean, they've got a relatively long history now, but I think we've seen increased interest in them recently. And one of the reasons why they might be popular now is because interest rates are really low. So all the proceeds of the SPAC get put into a trust account. So it works very well while interest rates are low, and it's sort of a way of investors putting their money in a place where they know that they may get sort of the opportunity to participate in an equity transaction in the future, while knowing that they'll get pretty much all their money back if no target is identified within a period of 12 months or 18 months.
And with low interest rates likely to continue for the foreseeable future, hopefully they will continue to boom.
Yeah, or possibly even negative interest rates. We'll see.
Indeed, good news for mortgages.
Yeah.
Lodewijk, I wonder if we could just move on to another element of financial product, the issue perhaps of incubator funds. I understand they're very, very popular with the hedge fund industry, but increasingly with the digital asset or crypto class. Have you any thoughts or comments on those?
Yes, I do. Where shall I start? So around the world, obviously the question is, if you have a crypto asset, is it an investment in the sense that it should be regulated? And the BVI has so far not said that it is. So if you are a service provider in respect of cryptos, you're generally free to do so. Now, the same doesn't apply if you're a fund. Because a fund, if you collect asset, or if you collect contributions and you invest it, the question is not what do you invest it in, but the question is, are you investing collectively? So if you want to try and invest in crypto assets or anything like that, you would be caught by the regulation. And here is where the BVI shows, I think, a great spectrum of pragmatism, and has a number of categories of funds that you can trial, where you can sit in a regulated space without having the burden of regulation. So the best of both worlds, in a way.
Yeah.
Incubator Fund is one of them. I believe it's the 20-20-20 rule.
Yes.
So AUM should be less than 20 or stay not come over 20. If you have a very volatile fund, this may be challenging on occasion. 20 investors, and you basically get approval. So it is almost like what is also known as the regulatory sandbox, where you are exempted from a number of the rules that normally would apply to a collective investment scheme. So it's a fantastic way of trying your strategy out, if that's what you want to do. Obviously, if you're trying it out with seed capital that is just one person funding it, you're not a fund. But if you have a couple of investors that each want to put up a little bit and let you run with it, this is a wonderful place to be and do that.
Okay. Well, it's good to see what was originally intended as probably a hedge fund response is rapidly responding to a new opportunity with the digital asset class, which is bound to grow and grow. And it's opportune that the Commission is really driving forward with their sandbox and their fintech initiative, and great credit to them. I do know that they consulted very widely on that. Let's dwell on funds a bit. Round about the same time that the incubators were introduced, I believe the approved fund regime was also introduced. Now, we are quite well known for trust and succession planning. Family office activity is big. My understanding is the approved fund is quite popular with family offices. Can you both comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the approved fund has been really a very successful introduction to the market. It does offer a slightly lighter touch regulated product. It's still limited to 20 investors, but it allows you that little bit more headroom, so you can go up to $100 million. And it could be set up and approved very quickly without huge amount of cost. It's still exempt from things like custodian and some of the other service providers. So it sits very well in the middle ground for those family offices who may be looking to branch out in the future and set up a full big sort of externally facing fund. They might start with an approved fund and do that for a year or two before converting. So
okay.
Yeah.
And on average, are you aware of the timing of conversion? Is there any general standard that seems to be followed?
I have not seen the statistics on conversion. I mean, what I have seen is a couple of incubator funds which were set up initially for 2 years, which have extended by an additional year, and then they'll make a decision whether to convert at that point.
Okay. And the general theme seems to be one of cost effectiveness, speed, simplicity, and it would appear friendliness with the regulator, which is very desirable. My understanding is that the incubators and the approved funds still don't require an audit requirement, so that might be a factor. Do you think that may change at some point?
Well, it's a rule. There are exemptions, and if people have a certain transparency in their portfolio and the type of assets that they have, it will be easier to get that exemption. Anybody, being in a regulated space in some manner, needs to realize that a regulator will look at it in a sort of an audit spectrum. So they will look at what is the risk that something goes wrong and what are the controls around that. So if you're looking for an exemption, there's a lot of flexibility in the system, and the regulator is quite willing to come back and think with you on short turnaround times. It's possible to step outside the audit requirement, but you will have to build a case, which is doable.
I think on audits as well, it's worth remembering. This flows through into private investment funds as well, which we might touch on. where there's an audit requirement, there's still flexibility. It doesn't have to be a local audit, which means that funds often will have their own auditor anyway, but they can just carry on using their audit where they're based.
Sure. And you touched on the new PIF regime, the private investment fund regime. Could I have your comments on that? Let's start with you, Patrick.
Well, I think the new regime, which will be effective from the end of this month, is quite welcome. It provides, for most private investment funds, it won't really add much in the way of requirements from what a properly run fund is actually doing. I think one thing to say is it's not expected to catch much more than what we typically think of as being a fund. So if it feels like a fund, then it might be called. But if you're just one investor, or if you're just coming together with a group to invest in one asset, then you're not going to be in scope of the private investment funds regime.
So it's more of a logical consolidation because there was always a closed-end fund regime anyway. And my understanding is going to be very beneficial in the sort of private equity space and perhaps to some extent the venture capital space as well.
Yeah, I think there are some investors who are only able to invest in regulated assets. So to that extent, then this will be within a light touch, relatively light touch regulation.
Yeah, and that's right. And it's well done. It's thoughtful, and it just tries to touch on the sort of the normal process aspects that you would expect in anybody who's looking after other people's money. So in this case, you need to point out, so who is making sure the assets are actually there? It's not particularly burdensome if you have a straightforward asset class. You have a few of accounting rules around it, but look at the benefit. At that point, there is a certain transparency. You can say that you're being regulated by a recognized regulator in the financial center in the world. And we have seen clients who come and actually want to be regulated because it gives them a benefit if they want to invest in a particular areas and need some sort of qualification.
Okay, great. Yeah. Guys, we're going to take a short break now and then come back in a few minutes' time. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
How does financial services benefit the BVI? It's been around for more than 3 decades before the World Wide Web and is now part of the everyday life of our islands. More than 2,200 people are directly employed in financial services, and another 3,000 jobs are supported indirectly. Jobs are corporate service providers, lawyers, insolvency, accounting, banking, insurance, regulators. That's almost 27% of the national workforce. Of those, more than 65% are BVI landers and belongers. What about restaurants, supermarkets, or shops? Well, 100% of people eat. So, they buy food. They buy swimsuits and shampoo and cars and power tools and plantains and fish and roti and pates. Financial services employees buy painkillers and lots of beer. Then there's electricity and dental floss and toilet paper and pretty much everything else. And everyone needs a roof over their heads and a place to do business, so we all rent or buy from a local landlord. Housing and office space alone means millions of dollars into the pockets of BVI families. At the end of the day, everyone benefits, including charities who receive thousands of dollars every year. And more than 60% of all government revenues come from fees paid by financial services. This money is spent on schools, roads, ports, scholarships, the environment, health, sports, children, youths, and the elderly. Financial services contributes more than $290 million to the BVI economy. That's more than 30% of all economic activity is driven by financial services. This creates thousands of jobs all across the islands, meaning more people have a way to earn a living. What does financial services do for the BVI? Let's just say, it keeps our lights on. Financial services is everybody's business. So, come on, mind your business, and let's not keep this to ourselves.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to BVI Finance Business Insight Series. I'm privileged to have with me two leading members of one of our most prominent law firms, Walkers, Patrick Ormond, who's the managing partner, and Lodewijk van Setten. And I'm delighted that they've found time to discuss at length their experiences of business in the BVI. Gentlemen, if we could perhaps go on to the issue of regulation. In the earlier part we discussed the general positive element in terms of interaction between regulator and regulated. What is your experience of what appears to be an increasing trend of extraterritorial regulation? Perhaps Lodewijk, could we start with you?
I'm not entirely sure about the question.
Where a jurisdiction from, let's say hypothetically, the United States imposes a requirement such as, say, FATCA, which has a global influence.
Right.
So you go from being
Right.
a domestic impact to something which is across the entire globe.
Yes.
I'm sorry I didn't make it.
No, I should probably was in the question.
Sorry.
There, wasn't it?
Any thoughts?
Yes, so I do. You see that the bigger blocks in the world, whether that be the US, and I think US definitely has set the pace there, but Europe has picked it up, have realized that if you want to access the client base in those jurisdictions, they can levy certain charges on you by way of regulation and have extraterritorial effect, which has an enormous impact on jurisdictions who are outside building product, trying to get it in, so the outside inbound product. FATCA definitely was a good example. You could argue actually that they have set a good pace there. Tax transparency in the normal world should actually be a good thing. It can become a bit of a situation, of course, when it's being used to tell other jurisdictions how they should regulate or what their legislation should be. Responding to that, it must be a dialogue, and it must be sensible in terms of the political pressures in the big blocks. I think the BVI, from what I've seen so far, are extremely nimble and have been able to discuss with the right connections what is necessary and also make that case without losing locally the pragmatism. So it's a good mark for them, I would say. Yeah.
Well, they certainly do their best to respond both on time, but also very effectively and pragmatically, be it FATCA, CRS, or more recent economic substance, of course. Patrick, would you like to add anything to what Lodewijk said?
Well, I think I'd just say that it's, as we said before, regulation is not something which is going away. It's something which is increasing, and it's global, and it's not just the EU; it's the OECD as well. So, I think many jurisdictions have faced challenges, and the challenge for us as a business community is to adapt and to meet those challenges. And if you take economic substance, I think that created a period of uncertainty to a degree, but industry and the government and BVI Finance will work together, and I think there is now that certainty. The EU were satisfied, so we've got whitelist, and I don't think it will be detrimental to the overall BVI business.
No, all right. Thank you. Both very good answers, and I think on the economic substance element, not only have we taken a very analytical approach to seeing which firms are caught and which are not, but equally we've done our best to liaise with the industry to work out the most practical and pragmatic approaches. And many actually see it as an opportunity. There will be some small disruption in the small cases which are impacted, but many actually see this as a great opportunity for the BVI, which is a net good thing. Earlier on, Patrick alluded to the whitelist. This is, of course, the list of cooperative countries, and the context, I think, was in the European Union version of that. I was wondering if you'd like to elaborate on that at all.
Well, I think all I'll say is that we definitely didn't want to be on the list of non-cooperative jurisdictions, and so it was a big effort from the government, from industry, to make sure that everything was put in place quite quickly in order to meet the requirements. And so it was great for industry and for the BVI generally that we got put on the whitelist earlier this year.
Well, a great team effort, and long may it continue, and long may we stay on said list. Lodewijk, anything to add to that?
No, not really to to what I said earlier. I reiterate, I'm relatively new to the BVI, but I'm very, very impressed with the flexibility of the system, the pragmatism, the clear setting of goals, and the ability of the government to maneuver in what is a very, very complex world. And also resource that internally. So for all of the work I've done for clients and the interaction that has been with the government and the sort of stuff we put in place, has been flexible, it's been clear, and there are answers to things and a certainty, which is a joy to work in, I must say. Yeah.
No, thank you. I'm going to ask both of you a hypothetical question, and that is that there are some commentators who've speculated that certain elements of extraterritorial requirements and legislation may have an ulterior motive, and the motive that they have expressed in italics and in inverted commas is subtle protectionism. Hypothetically, have you any thoughts on that accusation, either as an intent or a consequence?
Well, I mean, I think going back to economic substance, if you look at some of the elements will be difficult to comply with. So IP, I think everyone accepts that, and this is not just BVI, this is other jurisdictions as well. So those IP structures which got profits shifted into low tax jurisdictions, those aren't going to work anymore. But they have moved to some other jurisdictions where it may still work, and some of those may be in the areas where the pressure originally came from.
Funny that. Well, hypothetically responded to. Lodewijk, anything from you?
Well, a sort of a macro observation maybe. 2008 put financial services on the agenda for the wider population and the politicians, and it should be. It became from something that was a black box and just seemed to work to something that, the black box doesn't always work, maybe we need to look at it. As soon as it gets that sort of interest, you would expect that people have different ideas about what's right and what's wrong. So they start regulating it in that particular way, what's right and what's wrong. And I think it's easy to then point at it and say, it's protective. Well, by its very nature it will be protective, because it will be designed to do what those who've decided what is right to protect that. And those who decided something else will protect something else. So you would expect a little bit of conflict, but overall I think the fact that it's better understood, that the financial system is better understood, that it's better regulated, is to net to anyone's benefit around globally. Yeah.
And Lodewijk, I understand that one of the government initiatives, possibly being slightly distracted by COVID-19, is new data protection legislation. Can you comment on that?
Yes, thank you. The government, the BVI government, in its again pragmatism and sort of political, economic policy, has realised, of course, like around the world, that and accelerated now by COVID, that electronic execution and making sure that basically we live in a digitized environment or economy needs to be supported by legislation. So there's been what's known as the suite of e-bills have been there, which is e-transfer, electronic transactions, fund transfers, a few other things, and data protection, because you can't allow people to digitize data without protecting it, because of course it's so easy to move. That is now pending before the Assembly. From what I've seen of it, it's very solid again. It's the data protection is based on GDPR, So it has the same type of governance structure where you need to identify a controller and people who process the data, and that must be protected, which all makes sense, except that the BVI has chosen a little slightly different path here, in the sense that it says it includes in the data that must be protected commercial data from companies, which makes a lot of sense if you look at the type that the economy is constructed. So all in all, this suite of e-bills, if it comes through, really supports digitized business, and also gives what you would expect, that sort of protection around it that any substantively well-regulated jurisdiction would want.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, one of the great success stories, I'm told, is our response to the requirements for beneficial ownership and making sure there is a full audit trail to satisfy global standards. Have you, either of you, got any comments on the BOSS system and how it is working for you? And I understand it's been fully updated to reflect the new economic substance requirements. Patrick?
So, as a law firm, we don't actually have access to BOSS. So BOSS is operated by the registered agents, or inputted by the registered agents. So some of the practical elements I don't have experience of, but the feedback has been broadly positive. I think it's a world-leading system in its design and how it's used, and it provides a very secure means of beneficial ownership being uploaded in a secure private way, which can be accessible by law enforcement if needed. So I think it's been good, and it's being adapted to be the mechanism through which information will be submitted for economic substance as well.
And it seems to be a sort of trailblazer for other jurisdictions. So I think credit to the BVI that it's hopefully first in class, but certainly first in the queue for that very innovative and progressive system. Let me perhaps draw things to a close and ask very briefly for your comments from each of you on COVID-19 and how that has changed what is happening in the world for you.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth remembering that 2.5 years ago, the BVI was hit by Hurricane Irma, which was the biggest hurricane in the Atlantic ever recorded. And so in some ways we had a dry run. We all worked from different offices. Business continuity plans were put in place. So from running a business here perspective, we've coped very well. The government's coped very well. The registry has continued without any sort of break. The court moved to Zoom. So business has continued as normal. Obviously, there are impacts, and there are impacts on the economy and on our clients, and there will probably be more restructuring transactions. But again, I think you'll see the flexibility of the BVI corporate system come through to enable that and to enable companies to undergo restructurings, schemes of arrangement, plans of arrangement maybe, and hopefully come out the other side. And
it's perhaps worth reminding our audience that within 36 hours of the first hurricane hitting, we were still registering companies, not from a remote site, we were doing it here in the BVI. My only observation is that business continuity works so well, it almost worked a little too well, but I'm delighted that all of those firms came back, and perhaps that's a credit to our legal system, our regulator, and the philosophy of the BVI. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your very valuable time. This has been very insightful, and I'm sure our audience greatly appreciates it. One final comment from me. It was Winston Churchill who said, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, we proved it 2.5 years ago, and we've adapted very well with COVID-19. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your valuable time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.